Today we're going to go through and talk about how to solve quadratics by a different method. So far we've done it by taking square roots. Remember, that only works in certain cases. We've also done it by factoring, which is great as long as the quadratic will factor. Sometimes though you can't use the square root method and you can't solve by factoring, so we need another method. So this is our third method we're going to go through, which is completing the square. Before we do that though, I want you to pause this and go through and factor these 6 problems. This will be helpful for us as we go through to completing the square. So you pause it, factor it, and then come back and I will show you the answers. All right, just double check these with what you got. So the factors of 15 add up to be 8 are 3 and 5. So x plus 3, x plus 5. Factors of 16 add up to be 8 are 4 and 4. So you can write that as being x plus 4 times x plus 4 or x plus 4 squared. Factors of 36 add up to be a negative 12 or minus 6, which is really the same thing as x minus 6 squared. Factors of 144 add up to be 24 or 12 and 12 or x plus 12 squared. Factors of 1 add up to be 2 or 1 and 1 or x plus 1 squared. And minus 3 or x minus 3 squared. So those last 5 examples, 2 through 6, are what we call perfect squares. So if you take a trinomial, the 3 terms, and you factor it, and it comes out to have the same 2 factors, then x minus 6 squared, we call that a perfect square. That's really important because we're going to go through and solve quadratics, and part of the steps will be taking these perfect squares. So for the first step, we're just going to practice figuring out how do I make, if I have a quadratic, what can I add to the quadratic to make it a perfect square? So if you go back to here, something I want you to notice is compare this to your answer. If you look at it, the minus 6 is half of the minus 12. Okay, then the 36 is the minus 6 squared. Right? The 1 is half of 2, and 1 squared is 1. The minus 3 is half of negative 6, and negative 3 squared is 9. So there's a definite pattern to these. So what this question is, what number would I have to add right here to make that into a perfect square so that when I factor it, it came out to be a perfect square? Well, what it ends up being is you take the middle number, you take half the middle number, and then you square it. So half the middle number, half of 6 is 3, and 3 squared is 9. So I have to add a 9 right there to make it a perfect square. Then when I go to factor it, it's going to factor to be, factors of 9 added to be 6 are plus 3 and plus 3. So factors to be x plus 3 squared. So I want you to notice this number right here tells us what number is going to go right there. Let's try another one. I'm going to wait for that next one, but we'll put down x squared minus 8x plus something. Okay, so the way we do this is we take half the middle number, which is negative 4, and then we square it. Well, negative 4 times negative 4 is a positive 16, so it'll always be a plus, right? If it's a positive times a positive is a positive 9, or a negative times a negative gives me a positive. And then when I go to factor, I'm going to skip the middle step because I just made that a perfect square. By adding 16, I know it's a perfect square. We put an x there. And then this number right here is what goes right there. So it's x minus 4 squared is what that comes out to be. Okay, this example B is a little tricky because it's not going to come out evenly, but that's okay. Let's talk about how we would do this. So I take my middle number, negative 9. I divide it by 2, and then I square it. Now you have 2 options here. You could take that and switch it to be a decimal, or you can leave it as a fraction. I'm going to leave it as a fraction. If I square negative 9 halves, remember a negative times a negative is a positive. 9 times 9 is 81, and 2 times 2 is 4. If I just square the top and the bottom. So I have to add 81 over 4 to make that a perfect square. Okay, now I want to factor it. So I know it's a perfect square because I made it a perfect square. Okay, now go ahead and factor it. The x goes here. Whatever's in your parentheses goes right here. So factors to be x minus 9 halves squared. So this process we're doing is called completing the square. It's taking a quadratic and you're adding a number to it to make it into a perfect square so that when you factor it, you get a perfect square as it comes back out. This is the first few steps of this new method we're learning. So we're going to practice with that. Let's just pick, why don't you guys try number one, pause the video, try number one, and then come back and we'll double check. So I got to figure out first what number I have to add to complete the square. So I take the middle number, divide it by 2, and square it. Well, 10 divided by 2 is 5. 5 squared is 25. So I have to add 25 there to make it a perfect square. Okay, now factor it. We don't have to go through the big long factoring process because we know it's a perfect square. By adding 25, I made it a perfect square. So I just put the x in here, and then whatever number I have right there, that number right there, it's a positive 5 goes right there. The only thing that changes with this second example is it's still a plus. Right? I take negative 4, divide it by 2, oops, square it. That'd be negative 2 squared. Negative 2 times negative 2 is a positive 4, right? Still a plus. Has to be a plus there. And now factor it. X goes there. And then there's a minus 2. So it comes out to be minus 2 squared. Let's do this last fraction one. So I take 7. I divide it by 2. That one does not come out evenly, but that's okay. Just square the top and the bottom. So 7 squared is 49. And 2 squared is 4. So that's what number I have to add to make it a perfect square. And now factor it. X, and that number goes right there. So x plus 7/2 squared. Okay, this is the first part of your assignment. So I want you to do this on a separate sheet of paper. Go ahead and take these 6 problems. I want you to complete the square with each of them. And then I pause the video while you do that. We want to make sure we're really good at this first. And then unpause it, check your answers, and then we'll go through the actual how to use it, how this helps you to solve quadratics. So pause it right now, try these, and then come back when you're done. So here are the answers. So on 1, you have to add 9, it factors to be x minus 3 squared. On 2, you have to add 144, factors to be a minus 12 squared. On 3, you have to add 49, factors to be c plus 7 squared. On 4, you have to add 81, factors to be b plus 9 squared. On 5, you have to add 121. It factors to be x minus 11 squared. On 6, that one doesn't come out evenly, so just square 5 over 2 would be 25 over 4 is what you have to add. When you factor it, it comes out to be x plus 5/2 squared. That's really the first steps of solving a quadratic by completing the square. So let's go through and actually go through all the steps. Okay. So when we go to solve a quadratic by completing the square, the first thing I do is I want to make sure it's in this form. I want to make sure the x squared comes first, the x comes second, and then I want my constant over on the opposite side. So this is a little bit different than factoring. If you remember with factoring, you want the constant on the same side. We want it equal to 0. On this one, I want the constant over on the opposite side. And that's already done for me on this example. I'm going to rewrite the problem, but I'm going to leave a space here because I want to add a number to complete the square over here. Whatever I add to the left side, I also have to add to the right side. Remember those properties, addition property of equality, when we solved equations, we talked about this, is whatever I add to the left side, I have to add to the right side. Okay, now just complete the square over here. So same thing we've been doing. Take the negative 10, divide it by 2, and square it. Well, negative 10 divided by 2 is a negative 5. Negative 5 squared is a 25. So I need a plus 25 right there. Well, if I add 25 to the left side, I have to add 25 to the right side. Okay, this left side is now a perfect square. So I know it's going to factor to be one of these. So x goes there. What did I factor to get the 25? What did I square to get the 25? It's right here, right? The negative 5. And negative 16 plus 25, if you add those together, I get 9. Well, once I get to this point right here, we know how to solve the rest of this. Like we've solved equations like this before. So now just solve for x. So I take the square root of both sides. X minus 5 equals, don't forget the plus or minus. Plus or minus the square root of 9 is 3. Okay, add the 5 over. So x is equal to a positive 5 plus or minus 3. Well, we can keep going on that, right? X equals 5 plus 3, and x is equal to 5 minus 3. So it comes out to be x equals 8, and x equals 2. So we solve that by completing the square. So if you look at this, first step is make sure it's in the right form. You got the x squared and the x over here. You got your constant on the opposite side. The next step is to complete the square, figure out what number to add right there, and then factor it. Make sure you add whatever the number add to the left side, you add to the right side. And then from there, you're just solving for x. Just getting x by itself. So let's try this one. So I've got a squared plus 6a minus 3 equals 0. So my first step is I want this constant over on the opposite side. So let's start with that. Got a squared plus 6a. Leave some space there because I'm going to have to add a number. But move the 3 over to the other side. If I move the 3 over, it's a minus 3. So if I move it over, I'm adding it. It ends up being a positive 3. Okay, now complete the square. And over here, this is helpful. Make sure you add the same thing to the right side. Okay, complete the square to figure out what number has to go there, right? I want it to come out to be a perfect square. So to do that, I have to add the correct number. To find out what number that is, I take the middle number, 6. I divide by 2, and I square it. Well, 6 divided by 2 is 3, and 3 squared is 9. So I know I need to add a 9 there. That means I need to add a 9 there. Okay, this part is now a perfect square. So factor it. It's going to be a. This number comes from right there, right? It's a positive 3. So x plus 3 squared equals 3 plus 9, which is 12. And once you get to here, you're just solving the equation. So we've solved equations like this before. That's why we practice these. I just get rid of the square by taking the square root. When I do that, don't forget to put the plus or minus. Okay, now move the 3 over, so I'm going to minus 3. So a is equal to, I'm going to put the negative 3 first. Now we should try to simplify that answer if possible. Now the square root of 12 is not a perfect square. We're going to get the exact answer here, so I don't want to plug it in the calculator and get a decimal. We're just going to simplify it. So let's take 12. Since it doesn't come out even, let's break it apart like we do. 2 and 6, 2 and 3. That's going to give me, right, square root of 2 squared gives me a 2 on the outside. I've got that 3 left, factor of 3 left over. So a is equal to a negative 3 plus or minus 2 on the outside. Now remember that's 2 answers, and I don't care if you write it separately, but it's negative 3 plus 2 squared of 3, and it's negative 3 minus 2 squared of 3. So it's your 2 solutions right there. Let's do this next one. Let's try one more, and then I'll have you try one on your own. Hopefully by then we've got it, and you'll be ready to go on the assignment. So this first step is done. I've got the x squared minus 16x on one side, the constant's on the opposite side. So let's just rewrite it, leaving a little bit of space there. So plus something, and my negative 15's in the right spot, plus something. Okay, figure out what number would I have to add to make it a perfect square. So I take negative 16 and divide it by 2. That's negative 8, and I have to square it. Negative 8 squared. Sorry, it's supposed to be a negative 8 squared. That would be 64. So I have to add a 64 to make it a perfect square. If I add it to the left side, add it to the right side. Okay, this part should now be a perfect square. When we added that 64, we forced it to be a perfect square. So now just take, what do I square to get x squared? What do I square to get, oh, and this number right here, right, is what goes right there. So it ends up being x minus 8 squared. Negative 15 plus 64, add those together. I think that comes out to be 49. Okay, now from here you're just solving for x. So to solve for x, get rid of the square. I know I've said this over and over again, but don't forget the plus or minus. And square root of 49 comes out evenly, it's just 7. Move the 8 over. 8 plus or minus 7, so one answer is 8 plus 7. Another answer is 8 minus 7. So we end up with x equals 15 and x equals 1. So if it comes out evenly, your square root, then you can keep going. If not, like the last problem, just take it and simplify it down as far as you can. This one's a little bit different because of the 2 out in front. But if you look at it, notice how 2 goes into all of these. If that ever happens, what we can do, in fact, if you do have a number out in front, we want to always divide by that number to try to simplify it down. So I'm going to divide this side by 2 and divide that side by 2. So divide each of these by 2. So 2 divided by 2 is x squared. 20 divided by 2 is 10. And 8 divided by 2 is a 4. So if you ever have a number out in front of the x squared, you have to divide by that number to get rid of it before you complete the square. Okay, I want you to pause the video now and to try this problem. I want you to go through the whole process of solving this by completing the square. I'll go through it also, but pause it and try it first before you watch me go through it. So we're going to start by moving that minus 4 over. So I have x squared plus 10x, make sure you leave some space here, equals, and if I move that 4 over, it becomes a positive 4. Okay, complete the square. Take that middle number, divide it by 2, and square it. That would be 5. So 5 squared is 25. I need to add a 25 right there. Add the 25 over on this side. Okay, now let's take this left side and factor it. We know it's a perfect square because I made it a perfect square by adding that 25. X goes there. 5 right here, it goes here. It's a positive 5. Add those together is 29. Okay, now it's just a matter of solving these. So take the square root of both sides. X plus 5 equals plus or minus square root of 29. Square root of 29 does not come out evenly, so I'm just going to leave it like that. Let's minus the 5 over. So negative 5 plus or minus square root of 29. Now, if we can simplify the square root of 29, we should. But if we do our little tree diagram, my 29 is prime. It doesn't factor. So that's my answer. Now, remember, that's two answers. I have negative 5 plus the square root of 29 and negative 5 minus the square root of 29. Let's just do one of these. I want you to try one more just to finish here. Let's have you do number 5. So pause the video, try number 5. Come back and I'll run through it with you just to do one final problem to make sure we get it. So the first step's already done because the minus 8's already on the other side. But I'm just going to write it as being, I need to leave me some space, all right? So I'm going to rewrite it just to leave some space there. Okay, complete the square. So I take half, excuse me, sorry. I take half of 12 and square it. Now that'd be 6. So 6 squared is 36. Got to have 36 there. Okay, now factor this. I know it's a perfect square, so it's easy to factor. M, what do you square to, or what do you square to get 36, which is really just that number, positive 6. Add those together. 36 and a negative 8. I think it's going to come out to be 28. Okay, solve from there. Square root, m plus 6 equals plus or minus square root of 28. Move the 6 over. When I do that, it becomes a minus 6. Okay, square root of 28. That does not come out evenly, but it does simplify. So let's simplify it down. 28, 4 and 7. 4 is 2 and 2. I've got a pair of 2's. So it ends up being negative 6 plus or minus 2 square root of 7. Hey, the bell rang. That must be the end. But that really is the end. Remember, that's two answers. You got negative 6 plus 2 square root of 7. And you've got negative 6 minus 2 square root of 7. Okay, that's it for completing the square. Go ahead and work through the assignment. As you have questions, make sure you let me know, and we can get together and I can help you with that. Thanks.